Data as an asset in the fight against knife crime. The recent and dramatic increase in knife crime has provoked an equally dramatic policy response. Significant new, though some would argue both renewed and constrained, resource has been provided to police forces and to police and crime commissioners with the expectation that it will deliver both an immediate and sustainable reduction in crime. Yet does not the achievement of this ambition rest on having a clear appreciation of the manifestation of knife crime, on an understanding of the drivers, both national and context specific, of knife crime, and on an understanding of the efficiency and effectiveness of existing policing and partnership strategies? This paper commences to address these questions in admittedly unequal measure. It explores the potential of data to serve as an asset in the fight against knife crime, to augment strategic and operational decision making. The paper is founded on a collaboration between Greater Manchester Police, the Greater Manchester Violence Reduction Unit, and the Crime and Wellbeing Big Data Centre. The challenge set in this paper is twofold. First of all, the national picture. Police forces are data rich, but tend to be information poor. The data compiled for statutory reporting purposes, such as ADR returns, does not necessarily support strategic and operational decision making. In other words, global counts may serve as measures of demand and performance, the what of a given problem, but they don't necessarily provide insight of the whom, where, when, and why. Second, the local picture. GMP ADR returns have been excluded from national statistics due to concerns surrounding their accuracy. In short, as knife crime began to rise nationally, in Greater Manchester, it appeared to exhibit stability or even decline. Something seemed to be awry. In response, Greater Manchester Police adopted a new manual counting procedure towards the end of 2017. This entailed the daily review of all crime records with reference to modus operandi text and crime intelligence data, rather than solely relying on the weapons, means, and instrument fields. The aims and objectives of the research. The primary aim of the research was to evaluate the efficacy of the revised knife count methodology adopted by Greater Manchester Police, and then to explore the potential of developing an automated and hopefully more efficient count methodology. Using the data generated by these techniques, the research has progressed to a second phase. In this phase, it has examined the current extent of knife crime and the longer term trend in knife crime in Greater Manchester, and begun to look at its nature and whether its nature has changed, specifically in the time period where knife crime has been seen to rise quite rapidly. The data and methodology used in this research requires brief explanation. First of all, we used a training data set of 15,288 crime numbers spanning the period December 2017 to November 2018, a period reflecting the time that Greater Manchester Police has deployed its new manual counting methodology relying on modus operandi and intelligence data sets. We also use the GMB glossary of knife crime terminology, which had been adopted to undertake this task. As well as the training data set, there is a full data set, approximately 1.6 million crime numbers spanning March 2013 to June 2019. And for the test data set, our research used the modus operandi text plus the instruments, weapons, means and weapons fields. The methodology is that of a convolutional neural network, a deep learning text mining algorithm. Essentially, these algorithms serve to search text data and identify references to knife crime, mirroring the manual review process, but with far greater speed. We deployed numerous algorithms. The first algorithm used keywords only and delivered 87% accuracy. In other words, the crime records identified as being knife crime related by the algorithm held a match in 87% of cases with those identified manually. Why did the algorithm not perform better? The key reasons were, following a manual review of the mismatches, the lack or vagueness of MO content, highlighting the importance of data recording standards, that the algorithm was unable to search the crime intelligence data, as in the manual counting procedure, and that the algorithm failed to probe context. For example, falsely identifying previous knife crime history or self-defense and self-harm as knife crime. To address this latter concern, a second algorithm was deployed, refined to take account of context. This algorithm delivered 91.2% accuracy, and on this basis, it was agreed to proceed to the next phase of research. The extent and longer-term trend of knife crime in Greater Manchester. Looking at the figure, the red line represents the GMP ADR knife crime return. Note the point at which the return was excluded from national statistics and the point at which the new manual reporting procedure was introduced. The green line represents the findings of the text mining algorithm. And by using this technique, it was possible to backdate the count of crime in Greater Manchester to March 2013. What can we draw from this figure? The algorithm generates a higher count than Greater Manchester's police's manual procedure, though in saying this, it does capture possession offences. There is significant distinction between the count generated by the algorithm in the period 2015 to 18 and that reported during this time by Greater Manchester Police. What we can see is that in Greater Manchester, knife crime began to rise slowly in the period 2013 to 15, and then quickly in the period 2015 to 18, prior to stabilising and commencing to fall in 2019. In the period 2015 to 18, knife crime in Greater Manchester rose by 89% if we include possession offences, and by 71% if we focus on the ADR count. By way of comparison, knife crime in the West Midlands rose by 69% and in London by 48% in the same time period. Prior to moving on from this figure, it is worth making a number of other brief points. Firstly, it appears that the breakdown in the traditional ADR counting procedure coincided with the introduction of new mobile recording devices, highlighting the need to ensure the integration of new technologies into the broader data architecture of a police force. Secondly, and more broadly, the efficacy of any count methodology rests on the quality of data recording. Thirdly, and as I am sure that most of you are aware, the National Police Chiefs Council recently consulted on potential changes to data collection with regard to offences involving knives or sharp instruments. Significantly, this included reference to the development of machine learning algorithms to better identify crimes flagged with aggregating factors. Our learning of this in this project is suggestive of the potential of such an approach, but also of its limitations, focused on data quality and the challenge in fully integrating the requisite data resources. The nature and questionable changing nature of knife crime. This slide presents a comparison of the prevalence and proportion of knife crimes by type in 2018 and 2015. There are several key observations that can be drawn from these data. Firstly, whilst the prevalence of knife crime nearly doubled in this period, the proportion of offences by type remained relatively stable. In other words, the rise in knife crimes can be characterised as being more of the same. That there were proportionate increases across most types of knife crime is significant when we move to consider the potential drivers of this surge. Of course, the picture is more nuanced than this. Offering a little more detail, the proportion of violence offences fell from 40 to 30%, whilst the proportion of possession offences rose from 33 to 41%. Here, we may conclude that policing practice itself, i.e. stop and search, has served to underpin at least part of the rise in knife crimes. Out of step with the general findings, seemingly, the prevalence of personal robbery offences has increased by 135%. This is an issue that we will return to later. Two further points are worth making. Firstly, often neglected in media representations of knife crime, domestic abuse comprises at least 1/3 of all violence, possession, and sexual related offences. Secondly, an organised crime group flag is attached to each crime when applicable. 10% of knife crimes carry such a flag. This proportion has remained consistent throughout the study period. In these terms, OCGs do not appear to account for the rise of knife crime in Greater Manchester. So, in summary, the proportional distribution of offences has remained relatively stable. There has been more of the same. Excluding possession offences from the analysis, whilst the scale of knife crime has increased, the average severity of knife crime offences has not. Turning now to consider the location and timing of knife crimes, the where and the when. Some very brief points. Where? Firstly, the knife crime hotspots cluster on the town and city centre locations in Greater Manchester, as you might expect, with Manchester the dominant hotspot. Secondly, and having said this, there are differing hotspot patterns by offence type. Thirdly, and out with town and city centres, 2/5 of all knife crime occurs in the most deprived neighbourhoods, despite these areas representing only 1/5 of all neighbourhoods in Greater Manchester, a pattern that has remained stable during the 2015 to 18 period. We can conclude, therefore, that there is significant area-based inequality in the exposure to knife crime. A proportionate increase in exposure equates to a significantly higher count of knife crime in deprived neighbourhoods. When? Whilst the overall peak for knife crimes is in the evening, extending into the early hours of the morning, particularly at weekends, the temporal pattern of knife crimes varies by offence type. Bringing both the where and the when together, these insights speak to the necessity of the spatial and temporal targeting of interventions. Known offenders and victims. Turning to the characteristics of known offenders and victims, the WHO, this figure combines the 2015 to 2018 data. Reflecting what is well known nationally, knife crime offenders in Greater Manchester are predominantly male and young, with the 15 to 19 years old age group accounting for 25% of all known offenders in 2018. Significantly, this represents a 5% increase on 2015. In other words, knife crime offenders are getting younger. It is not clear whether this is a consequence of the stop and search strategy in Greater Manchester or of the increase in robbery offences, though 44% of known offenders, robbery offenders that is, are 15 to 19 years old. At a Greater Manchester level, there is a disproportionate number of BAME offenders. However, when considering the neighbourhoods in which knife crime is concentrated, the BME offender profile is proportionate to the ethnic composition of these neighbourhoods. It is striking that the characteristics of victims mirror those of offenders, save females who comprise a larger proportion of victims. 60% of victims live in the 20% most deprived neighbourhoods in Greater Manchester. Significantly, the proportion of victims aged 15 to 19 years old increased from 20 to 25% between 2015 and 2018. In other words, knife crime victims are getting younger. Where it was possible to identify an offender, around 1/4 of offenders committed a knife crime against their peer age group. In overview, the characteristics of known offenders and victims have shifted marginally during the surge in knife crime. Again, it is a case of more of the same. That being said, younger people living in the most deprived neighbourhoods have borne the brunt of the increase. There is more that routinely collected data can tell us of the characteristics of offenders and victims. By applying a text mining algorithm to incident logs, in other words, not relying on the flags attached to knife crime records, we can begin to unpick aspects of the vulnerabilities of those involved. Here, we look at alcohol and mental ill health. This slide is generated with reference to the 2013 to 2019 data, and it identifies the proportion of offences by type in which alcohol misuse and/or mental ill health can be identified as contributing factors. For serious violence, for example, alcohol misuse can be identified in 37% of cases, mental ill health in 3% of cases, and both alcohol and mental ill health in 4% of cases. Note the sharp contrast between serious violence and robbery, a crime in which a significant proportion of offenders, if you remember, are 15 to 19 years old. Here, alcohol is only identified as a contributing factor in 7% of cases. Prior to leaving this slide, a word of caution. Whilst the text mining algorithms shed greater light on the prevalence of alcohol misuse and mental ill health in knife crimes, these techniques are still bound to underestimate the prevalence of alcohol and mental ill health due to the complexity of identifying mental ill health, the lack of training and statutory responsibility that police officers have with regard to mental ill health. Drawing the presentation to a conclusion, the question remains as to the relevance of these findings to the nation as a whole. Are these patterns of incidence and nature replicated elsewhere? If yes, we can ascribe with greater confidence common explanation. If not, then we'll require to consider city and regional context-specific explanations. Most likely, it will require a bit of both. This slide presents the long-term trends and rates of knife crime in Greater Manchester, the West Midlands, and London. It is interesting to note the similar trend and rate profiles of Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, as well as their distinction to London. Look, for example, at how knife crime began to fall in Greater Manchester and the West Midlands prior to London at the beginning of the period, and how it began to rise again prior to London. Then, towards the end of the period, the trends begin to merge in line with one another. We would certainly be interested in how others might explain these patterns. Is London a unique case? Do other metropolitan areas exhibit similar profiles to Greater Manchester and West Midlands? More important, when we examine the where, when and who of knife crime in these settings and under these trends, can we observe similar or dissimilar patterns? To know these things would greatly inform robust explanation and intervention. In the absence of a detailed comparison, we can draw the following conclusions. The research that I've presented here demonstrates the potential and limitations of automated knife crime counting procedures. They hold the capacity to interrogate multiple data sets consistently and quickly, but their accuracy rests on the quality of data recording procedures. It is possible to derive a more nuanced picture of knife crime from the data routinely captured by the police, the where, when, and who. This can extend to an assessment of the vulnerabilities of those involved. These data speak directly to people and place and can serve to guide policing and partner interventions. Examining the dramatic rise in knife crime in Greater Manchester in the period 2015 to 2018, we can draw a set of related conclusions. Firstly, the rise in knife crime generally comprised more of the same, the what and the whom. This is highly suggestive of the rise in knife crime being underpinned by a common or common set of why factors. So, what else happened in this period? What served to accelerate the forces driving knife crime? The most likely answer is the austerity measures that led to withdrawal of public services, inclusive of a substantial reduction in policing numbers. If we take the rise in robbery as a specific case of interest, a knife crime offence that exhibited disproportionate growth in this time period and one associated with the young. It has been extensively argued in the assessment of the austerity measures that the young are the age group most impacted by this agenda. Such a conclusion, of course, does not serve to guide policing interventions. Yet, the evidence of both the enduring and changing characteristics of knife crime presented in this study do. Specifically, these findings speak to the potential of developing integrated people and place-based interventions, of strategies that seek to address knife crime as a whole, as well as specific knife crime offences. It's at this point where we can just briefly speak to the next steps that our research partnership is taking. We're now progressing to develop more nuanced measures of knife crime, but primarily to assess how intelligence and investigation data resources can serve to guide the effectiveness of policing strategies. This is vital, as during a period of rapid increase in knife crime, the number of positively sanctioned outcomes increased. Now, this is a significant achievement when policing resources in Greater Manchester were in decline. However, the proportion of positively sanctioned outcomes fell. Simply put, the force could not cope with the scale of increase in knife crimes. Whilst new resources to be welcomed, the requirement to do more with less demands that we make better use of data and treat it as an asset in the fight against knife crime. Thank you.